The smell of a hospital after midnight is nothing like the smell during the day. During the day, it smells like purpose, coffee, antiseptic, the synthetic lavender of hand sanitizer pumped from wall dispensers every 30 seconds by people who are busy and important. After midnight, it smells like abandonment, like old sickness soaking into the walls, like floor wax baking under fluorescent lights that never, ever turn off. Earl Gaines knew that smell better than he knew anything else in his life. He had been pushing the same wide-handled mop across the polished linoleum of Hargrove Regional Medical Center for 11 years. Midnight shifts, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., when the hospital belonged to the skeleton crew, the overnight nurses, the bleary residents doing penance, the security guard named Phil who fell asleep at the desk by 2 in the morning. And Earl. Always Earl. Earl was 63 years old, though most of the day staff guessed older. His face was deeply lined, his hair the color of old iron, his build lean and economical, the build of someone who had never possessed excess in any form. But there was something in the way he moved that occupied space differently than his frame suggested. He did not shuffle, he did not drift. He walked with a quiet, measured precision that seemed oddly formal for a man pushing a mop bucket through an empty corridor at 3 in the morning. Nobody noticed. The day staff passed Earl without eye contact. Residents talked directly through him, conducting loud conversations while he maneuvered the mop around their feet like water around stones. The administrative staff barely registered his existence as separate from the equipment he operated. He was the mop, he was the bucket, the floor buffer that screamed like a wounded aircraft every Tuesday. He was the custodian, and custodians, at Hargrove Regional, did not exist. The only person who saw Earl, really saw him, was a 22-year-old nursing student named Priya Anand, doing her clinical rotation on the night shift, who had not yet learned the particular trick of selective blindness that the senior staff had perfected. "Mr. Gaines," she said one Tuesday, pausing in the corridor as he ran the buffer. She had to raise her voice over the machine's grinding shriek. "Did you get a chance to eat tonight? I brought extra from home, lentil soup." Earl killed the buffer. The corridor returned to its usual near silence, the distant ping of an elevator, the hiss of the ventilation system. He looked at the nursing student. His gray eyes were calm and steady, and, if she had known what to look for, deeply and carefully evaluating. He was always evaluating. He could not turn it off. "Thank you, Miss Anand," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, carrying a trace of an accent impossible to place precisely. Somewhere in the American South, but flattened by years of deliberate neutrality. "I ate at 10. You should keep it. Night shifts burn more than people think." Priya frowned. "You always say that." "Because it's always true," Earl said. A ghost of a smile moved across his weathered face, there and gone in a half-second. He restarted the buffer. The machine screamed again, and the conversation was over. Priya watched him work for a moment before turning down the corridor. She couldn't articulate what bothered her about Earl Gaines. It wasn't anything he said or did. It was his stillness, not the stillness of passivity, but of a coiled spring, enormous compressed energy held in check by sustained, habitual will. She didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. The new facilities manager arrived on a Wednesday in March. His name was Derek Paulson, 29 years old, a master's degree in healthcare operations management he referenced constantly, and the particular confidence of someone told he was exceptional so many times he had never thought to verify it. He wore his hair in a hard side part that looked architectural. He arrived at Hargrove Regional with a mandate: reduce facilities overhead by 15%. He had a spreadsheet, a performance improvement framework, color-coded accountability matrices. What he did not have was any interest in learning what the people under him actually did. Earl met him on Derek's third day. The facilities manager arrived at the night shift handover with a tablet and expensive coffee. "You're Gaines, 11 years on nights. Your reviews say satisfactory. Consistently satisfactory." He said the word like it tasted like old food. "Satisfactory is the floor." "Understood," Earl said. Derek's complete absence of reaction irritated him. He had expected deference or friction. This steady, neutral acknowledgement gave him nothing to work with. "You've been here 11 years, and you're still on nights. Day shift positions, post internally." "I prefer nights," Earl said simply. Derek made a sound and looked back at his tablet. "Make sure your logs are current." That was their introduction. What came next was 11 months of slow, grinding, low-level warfare conducted entirely on Derek's initiative against a man who refused to fight back. It began with the log system. Earl completed his logs precisely, on time. Derek audited weekly, found nothing wrong, expanded to unannounced physical inspections. He found very few imperfections. The supply rooms were organized with a precision that would have given Derek pause if he'd been paying a different kind of attention. Everything sorted not alphabetically, but by frequency of emergency access. Items grabbed fastest in a crisis at front and hand level, grouped by function. A stocking system that made no sense if you were thinking about inventory management, and perfect sense if you were thinking about the 15 seconds between a patient crashing and the equipment needed to respond. Derek didn't notice. He was looking for dust. He found some on a grill, sent a formal written notice. Earl cleaned it, documented the cleaning, said nothing. Derek began timing Earl's routes and determined his circuits were 12% less efficient than Derek's optimized floor plan. "You go east on the 3rd floor before west," Derek said in a mandatory meeting. "Optimized route goes west first, saves 4 minutes per circuit. The east corridor has ICU overflow rooms. Patients are confused at 2 in the morning. Nobody's at the desk. Radio the nursing station if you see something concerning. The nursing station has 2 people covering 4 floors at 2 in the morning," Earl said. "That is not your problem." "Understood," Earl said. He continued cleaning the east corridor first. Derek wrote him up for insubordination. The write-up sat in Earl's file alongside 11 years of satisfactory reviews, accomplishing nothing specific except giving Derek something to gesture at significantly in subsequent meetings. The incident that crossed from chronic into acute happened on a November afternoon. Derek was conducting a facilities walkthrough with 2 hospital board members. They arrived at the 3rd floor supply room to find Earl reorganizing shelving after an incorrectly stocked delivery. "This is what I'm talking about," Derek told the board members, gesturing at the supply room. "Custodial staff doing unsupervised reorganization of clinical supplies. No oversight. Liability." One board member, Patricia Chen, a retired OR nurse, looked at the shelving and frowned. "This is organized by emergency access priority," she said. "Exactly," Derek said, misreading her tone. "Completely non-standard." "It's actually quite good," Patricia said. She looked at Earl. "Who taught you to stock like this?" "Experience," Earl said. Derek cut in. "Mr. Gaines, clear the room for the audit, service corridor." In the hallway, Priya fell briefly into step with Earl. "I heard what he said. It wasn't fair." "No," Earl agreed. "You should say something." "To HR, Miss Anand." His voice was gentle but final. "In 11 years, I've learned this hospital runs because people do their jobs without asking for recognition. I do my job, that's enough." Priya opened her mouth, reconsidered, and closed it. Not a single person in the building had any idea what was sleeping inside the invisible man with the mop. Every night, at precisely 1:45 in the morning, Earl took his break in the basement mechanical room, technically off-limits to custodial staff, accessed with a key he'd possessed so long nobody remembered issuing it. Loud in there, a constant thrumming vibration at the base frequency of the building, warm from the equipment, private in a way nowhere else in the hospital was private. Earl sat on an upturned equipment case and read. History, mostly, though occasionally structural engineering references, emergency response frameworks, geological survey reports for the county. He read with the focused attention of someone extracting information rather than experiencing narrative. Once in a while he didn't read, he sat and listened to the building, with trained, diagnostic attention, sorting normal from anomalous. After 11 years, he knew every sound Hargrove Regional made, the refrigerant cycle in pharmacy cold storage, the resonance the elevator made when cable tension needed adjusting, preceding a maintenance flag by 6 weeks, if you knew what you were hearing. He knew the building. This was not an accident. Nobody knew about the footlocker in Earl's apartment. Military issue, olive drab, hasp lock replaced twice because the originals wore out. Inside, a dress uniform folded with mechanical precision, a set of medals in a velvet-lined case, photographs, documents, a tactical notebook filled with dense handwriting that wasn't English and would have required very specific clearance to interpret. And at the bottom, wrapped in chamois cloth, a military-grade encrypted communications device, maintained in perfect working order through acquired components and a technical fluency that does not appear on a custodial resume. He was not waiting for something. He had stopped waiting a long time ago, but he was ready in the way that certain people never stop being ready, because readiness had been burned into them below thought, below choice, below the deliberate construction of a quiet life in a hospital basement. Derek Paulson's campaign reached its formal peak on a Thursday morning in late November. The meeting was in Derek's office. HR sat in the corner. 2 formal written notices: route deviation, insubordination, non-compliance. Derek placed his palms flat on the desk. Your position is being reclassified, effective in 30 days. Basement utility crew, day shift supervisor, reduced hourly rate. A beat of silence. The basement utility crew, Earl repeated. Correct. Earl's gray eyes were entirely unreadable. He thanked HR. He walked out, down the corridor, into the stairwell, all the way down to the basement mechanical room, where he sat on his equipment case and looked at the pipes for a long time. Whatever he was thinking, he kept it entirely to himself. 2 days later, the ground opened up. It began as a vibration. Not unusual in a hospital. Hospitals vibrate. HVAC units cycle. Elevators travel their shafts. The building absorbs the traffic of human bodies moving through it constantly. Vibration is the baseline condition of an inhabited structure. But Earl knew this building's vibrations the way he knew his own heartbeat. And at 11:47 on a Saturday night, standing in the 3rd floor corridor with his mop, he felt something that was not in the baseline. He stopped, put the mop handle against the wall, pressed the sole of one boot flat against the linoleum. Subtle. A seismograph would barely measure it, a small, localized tremor running through the building's lower structure. Not an earthquake. The frequency was wrong. Earl set the mop in the bucket and went down. Below the ground floor, into the basement corridor that ran beneath the hospital's original 1960s wing. Concrete block walls painted the color of old bone. Pipes clustered along the ceiling. Fluorescent fixtures on a circuit last upgraded in 1987. The particular sealed air quality of spaces that don't breathe. He walked the length of the corridor, touching the wall at intervals, reading the structure through his palm. At the north end, near the junction with the original wing's foundation, he found it. The wall was wet. Not dripping, not visibly damaged, but beneath the paint, the block was saturated. He could feel it through the surface, the subtle give of waterlogged material, the coolness of moisture pressure building from outside. He crouched and pressed his ear against the base of the wall. Beneath the HVAC, beneath the pipes, he could hear something, distant, steady movement, like something flowing through stone. He tried the facility's radio, static, poor reception in the basement. He took the stairs to the ground floor. Security desk, this is Gaines. I need the engineering supervisor on call. Structural moisture indicators in the north basement corridor. Possible foundation compromise. Phil, the security guard, responding with the skepticism of someone half awake. Moisture in the basement. I'll log it. Phil, contact engineering now, not log it, contact. It's midnight, Earl. You want me to call the sup for a wet wall? Yes. Phil sighed and said he'd log a non-emergency request for morning. Earl put the radio back on his belt and returned to the stairwell. He walked the north corridor again, this time with a flashlight. He found 2 additional saturated sections. He found a crack, hairline, vertical, running up the block from the floor, that had not been there during his monthly sweep 6 weeks ago. He photographed it. At the far end of the corridor, where the original wing's foundation connected to the 1980s expansion, the junction showed significant new cracking, multiple vertical lines. The seam between 2 construction eras was separating, not dramatically, not visibly on a casual inspection, but with the deliberate geological patience of structural failure working on its own schedule. Earl stood in the corridor for 45 seconds and ran the calculations: the saturation rate, crack propagation pattern, load distribution of the wing above, the 3 days of heavy rainfall that had saturated the clay soil, the deferred maintenance history of this exact seam. He had done similar calculations before, in different contexts, with higher stakes, faster timelines, and the noise of very bad things happening nearby. He got on his personal phone and called the hospital's main switchboard. "This is Earl Gaines, night custodial. I need the administrator on call and the head of plant operations. Structural emergency, now." The switchboard operator said, "Can you describe the nature of—" "Foundation failure in the north basement corridor of the original wing," Earl said. "The section below medical records storage, radiology archive, and patient bed storage. If you have patients in the original wing above the 4th floor, they need to be moved. Call the administrator on call. Tell them the north foundation seam is failing. Tell them now." A pause. "Sir, are you—" "Now," Earl said. The word contained no anger, no alarm, no uncertainty. It was an operational order delivered to someone who did not yet understand that refusal was not an option. The operator called the administrator on call. Dr. Patricia Chen, the retired OR nurse who also served on the hospital board, who had seen Earl's supply room organization 2 months ago, answered her phone at 12:11 in the morning and listened. Then she called Earl's cell directly. "Mr. Gaines, tell me exactly what you're seeing." Earl told her. Precise language. Measurements where he had them. Estimates identified as estimates. Crack propagation. Saturation pattern. Weather history. Deferred maintenance record of the junction seam. Load above the compromised section. A silence. "How do you know about the deferred maintenance history?" she asked. "I read the reports," Earl said. Another silence. "What's your recommendation?" Nobody had asked Earl Gaines for a recommendation in 11 years. Now, the administrator on call, a woman who identified competence by its texture rather than its title, was asking the invisible man with the mop. "Evacuate the original wing above the 2nd floor," Earl said. "Engineering and structural assessment on site immediately. Set up monitoring at the North Corridor Junction. Redirect incoming patients." "I'll make the calls," she said. "Stay where you are." Earl went back to the North Corridor. 12 minutes later, the wall moved. It was not an explosion. It was the quiet, implacable surrender of saturated concrete block under sustained water pressure, a 4-meter section of the north wall bowing inward, then fragmenting along its mortar lines. The noise it made was like a building clearing its throat. Water came through the gap with the force of a pressure hose. Simultaneously, the structural shift transmitted upward through the foundation into the frame. 4th and 5th floors of the original wing developed instability within minutes. Cracks in the plaster. A section of drop ceiling in medical records fell. 2 patient windows cracked along their frames. The hospital's disaster alarm activated at 12:23 a.m. In the basement corridor, knee-deep in water and concrete dust, Earl clicked on his flashlight and moved toward the worst of it. The first people he found were in the medical records storage room. 2 archival staff members working late, pulling files for an audit. They had been in the building's blind spot, staff nobody thinks about at midnight, in a room sitting directly above the compromised foundation. When the structural shift hit, the floor-to-ceiling industrial shelving had cascaded. Both workers were down, buried under metal and paper weight. 3-second assessment, 1 conscious with a leg fracture, 1 unconscious with a head laceration bleeding, with a steadiness demanding immediate attention. Earl pulled the shelving off with controlled, precise movements, measured lateral slides calculated before he touched them, checked the unconscious man's airway, maintained it, pressed his hand against the head wound with calibrated pressure, and got on the radio. 2 casualties in medical records, basement north. 1 unconscious, head laceration, 1 conscious, suspected fracture. Need emergency response now. He stayed on the wound and talked calmly into the radio until a team reached him, then handed the pressure job to the first paramedic and was back in the corridor before that paramedic finished his first assessment. The structural team's hasty survey had identified 3 problem zones. Earl had already identified 2 of them. The third was a utility junction in the sub-basement, below the basement level, accessed through a floor hatch that housed the hospital's primary electrical and communications infrastructure. If that junction failed, the hospital lost primary power. Backup generators would take the load, but the transition created a window, short but real, during which every monitor, every ventilator, every critical system would experience a momentary interruption. In a hospital with patients on life support, a moment was not nothing. Earl found the hatch, found it accessible, and dropped through into 3 feet of water. The sub-basement was below the waterline now. The foundation breach had found its way here through the building's drainage channels, filling the space from the lowest point up. In his flashlight beam, the water was black with disturbed sediment. The electrical panels lined the walls, their lower sections already submerged. Earl was not an electrician, but he had spent 11 years learning this building's electrical topology. He knew which panels fed which circuits, the load distribution, which breakers tripped by rising water before the engineering team arrived would pull down primary power before generators could stabilize. He moved through the water to the primary distribution panel. The manual isolation switches, old technology, big physical breakers designed for exactly this emergency, were above the current water line. He isolated the critical circuits systematically, most vulnerable to least, in the order their failure would cascade. Earl was chest-deep in the water by the time he finished. It was very cold. He isolated the last circuit, confirmed the panel status, and moved back toward the hatch. He was 3/4 of the way there when the ceiling section decided it was done. Acoustic tile and framing and steel grid, dislodged by the structural shift. Most of it hit the water. Some of it hit Earl. He went under, came back up disoriented. Water black, flashlight gone, hatch somewhere to his left, in a space that felt entirely different than it had 30 seconds ago. He oriented by the sound of the water and the memory of the room's layout, and moved through the dark until he found the hatch ladder. He climbed. In the corridor above, a rescue team found him emerging at 12:57 a.m., bleeding from a cut on his temple, saturated with cold water, not functioning the way any 63-year-old custodian should, after what the sub-basement had done to him. He gave a complete verbal report on the electrical isolation, told them which circuits remained vulnerable if water continued to rise, described the hatch structural condition, and recommended they not send anyone back until an engineer assessed the ceiling. Then he sat down on the corridor floor, because his knee was bad, and waited. Priya found him there 10 minutes later. She stopped when she saw him. This quiet, invisible man, sitting on a wet corridor floor, bleeding from his head, absolutely still. "Mr. Gaines," she crouched in front of him, "I need to look at that." "It's superficial," he said. "I'll make that call." She opened her kit. "What happened down there?" "The rescue team said you isolated the electrical panels." The water was approaching the primary distribution board. Someone needed to isolate the critical circuits. "Someone with electrical training," Priya said, pressing gauze against his temple. "Someone who knew the panel layout," Earl corrected quietly. Priya worked in silence for a moment. "The people in record storage," she said. "The paramedics said someone had the head wound controlled and the fracture patient stabilized before they got there." "I stayed until they arrived," Earl said. "Mr. Gaines." She sat back on her heels and looked at him directly. "Who are you?" Earl was quiet for a moment. "I'm the night custodian," he said. "That's not an answer," Priya said. "No," Earl agreed. "It's not." Down the corridor, voices multiplied. Boots on concrete, radios crackling, the organized sound of a response machine assembling itself around a crisis. Earl tilted his head slightly. He could hear something else. From outside the building, heavy, rhythmic, approaching from the northeast. Multiple rotors, heavy lift. Military. His eyes changed, not dramatically, not in a way Priya could have named precisely, but something in the absolute, careful blankness of his expression shifted, like a curtain moving in a room you thought was sealed. Something that had been sleeping a very long time opened one eye. "Go back to triage," Earl said. His voice was different, not louder, not harder, but something had been turned back on. "Your patients need you." They came through the front entrance at 1:17 in the morning. 4 Army Corps of Engineers officers in ACUs, a civilian structural assessment team, 2 military police, and behind them, Brigadier General Marcus Webb, United States Army Corps of Engineers, 58 years old, built for function rather than impression, carrying the specific gravity of someone who had made decisions in collapsing buildings. He walked to Patricia Chen's command post, assessed her situation summary, asked 3 expected questions, and then a 4th. "Where is the custodian?" Patricia blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The man who identified the foundation failure. Called it before the breach, isolated the electrical panels. North basement corridor. One of our nurses is with him. Take me to him," Webb said. Earl saw the boots first. He was still sitting on the corridor floor, his back against the wall, watching the activity at the far end with calm, cataloging attention. The boots stopped in front of him. He looked up. For a long moment, neither man said anything. Webb looked at the older man on the floor, the cheap custodial uniform, the hospital ID badge, the gray hair, the lined face, the cut on his temple professionally dressed, the hands resting loosely in his lap with the particular stillness that Webb had spent 30 years learning to recognize. "Earl Gaines," Webb said. "Not a question." "Marcus," Earl said. Webb crouched down to eye level. The 2 men looked at each other with the directness of people who have no illusions left to maintain. 11 years, Webb said. 11 years, Earl agreed. "You know I've been looking." "I know. Margaret's been gone 4 years. I thought after—" "I know what you thought," Earl said quietly. "I needed quiet." Webb was silent. Around them the recovery operation continued, engineers moving past, radios crackling, the systematic sound of a crisis being organized into manageable components. Nobody paid attention to the 2 old men having a conversation on the basement floor. "You called it," Webb said. "The foundation. You read the building and you called it. I've been reading this building for 11 years. You isolated the electrical panel. Someone had to." "Earl." Webb's voice carried a sudden edge, not anger, but something firmer than patience. 2 people are alive upstairs because you controlled their wounds in the dark before the paramedics got there. The hospital has power because you went into a flooded sub-basement alone and threw the right breakers. You called the evacuation recommendation 40 minutes before the breach." He paused. "Don't tell me you just made a phone call." Earl looked at the corridor floor. "I'm a custodian, Marcus. You are Lieutenant Colonel Earl Gaines, retired, Army Corps of Engineers, Special Operations Support, 3 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and a commendation that cannot be described in a public place," Webb said. He stood, straightened, looked down at the man who had disappeared into a hospital basement and tried to become nobody. Something moved across his face, not grief, not anger, very much like respect. "And you are not going to sit on this floor." He extended his hand. Earl looked at it and took it. Webb pulled him to his feet. "What do you need?" Earl said. "Compromised foundation, unstable upper wing, 17 patients to relocate, and a structural assessment that will go faster with someone who knows this building." "I know every inch of it," Earl said. "I know you do," Webb said. What happened next took 4 hours. Earl moved through the building with Webb's engineering team, reading the structure out loud now, in the compressed, precise language of his first career. He walked the Corps engineers through the load-bearing logic, identified secondary compromise points under stress, guided the assessment with the efficiency of someone who had performed structural triage in active combat zones and understood the difference between what could wait and what could not. Derek Paulson arrived at 2:30, intending to manage the situation. He found his facilities department entirely subordinated to a military engineering team directed by an old man in a wet custodial uniform speaking to Army Corps officers in a technical register that Derek's master's degree had not prepared him to follow. He approached Patricia Chen. Who authorized the military presence? I did, Patricia said, without looking at him. That man is custodial staff. He doesn't have clearance. Mr. Paulson, Patricia said, cutting him off. She looked at him the way she might look at equipment performing outside its parameters. Please go home. I'm the facilities. General Webb, Patricia said, raising her voice slightly. Webb appeared at the corridor entrance. He looked at Derek with the expression of a man who has never encountered a room he couldn't command. Derek looked at the rank insignia, the military police by the entrance, the corridor where Earl Gaines was briefing a Corps major with complete authority. He did not ask his questions. He did not go home either. At 6:15, as the first gray light came through the lobby windows, the structural assessment was complete. Compromised wing stabilized with emergency shoring. 17 patients relocated. The 2 casualties from medical records were in surgery. 1 for a leg fracture, 1 for a head injury, serious but survivable. Earl was near the lobby entrance when Priya appeared at his elbow. You weren't going to say anything. Not a question. No, he agreed. You would have just gone back to your locker and come back next shift. Yes, that's insane. It's private. Mr. Gaines. Her voice was young and certain. You saved this building. You saved those people in records. Everyone on the 4th and 5th floors who would have still been there if you hadn't called the evacuation 20 minutes before that wall came down. The administrator called the evacuation. Because you told her to. Why? Why 11 years as the invisible man? Margaret is buried 6 blocks from this hospital, Earl said. I wanted to be near her. I wanted to do something that mattered, without it mattering to anyone. I spent 30 years mattering to a great many people, in ways that cost everything I had. I was tired. Priya was silent. I'm sorry about your wife. Thank you. The building needed someone paying attention. Someone was going to pay attention eventually. From behind them, a door opened. Boots on the lobby floor, measured, formal, deliberate. General Webb walked toward them. Behind him, 2 of his officers. Webb was carrying something, a small case with the specific weight and meaning that certain cases carry. He stopped in front of Earl. He opened it. Inside, on velvet, Earl's medals. Not copies. The actual decorations. Sourced in the 4 hours since Webb had found him in the corridor, through a process Earl decided not to think about carefully. The Silver Star, 3 bronze stars, the commendation device. You can tell me no, Webb said quietly. You have the right, but I'd like to do this properly, because it hasn't been done properly yet. Earl looked at the case. He looked at the lobby around him, staff who had paused in their work, drawn by something they could feel but hadn't named, the overnight nurses, the residents, the Corps engineers, Priya, Phil the security guard, wide awake for once, Patricia Chen watching from the command post, and Derek Paulson, still here after all, standing near the entrance with his tablet under his arm, watching the invisible man receive something his organizational charts had no category for. All right, Marcus, Earl said. General Marcus Webb stepped back 1 pace. His 2 officers stepped back and came to attention. In the lobby of Hargrove Regional Medical Center at 6:22 in the morning, with the winter light coming through the windows and the building settling around them after its long night, Marcus Webb raised his right hand in a salute that was precise and formal and contained everything that formal gestures are invented to contain. His officers followed, crisp, simultaneous. The unified click of their heels echoed like a gunshot across the silent lobby. Earl Gaines stood in his wet, ruined custodial uniform, hospital ID badge, dressed temple wound, the bad knee that had been bad since Kandahar, and he straightened. Not dramatically, just completely, the way something straightens when all the compression is released at once. He raised his hand and returned the salute. The lobby was entirely silent. Patricia Chen walked quietly to Derek Paulson. "I'll need your resignation on my desk by Monday." Derek looked at her, looked at Earl, still at attention, nodded once, and left. Earl did not go home until 9 in the morning. He finished his shift, not the custodial route, north section closed, but he walked the accessible corridors with his cart, cleaning what needed cleaning. Several people looked at him differently. He noticed this without comment. Priya caught him near the elevator at 8:50. "Webb wants to talk to you. A consulting role. Structural resilience for sensitive facilities." "I know," he told me. "Are you going to take it?" Earl pressed the elevator button. "Margaret's grave is 6 blocks from here. I visit on Sundays. I'd like to keep doing that." "A consulting role doesn't mean you have to move," Priya said. "No," Earl agreed. He stepped into the elevator. The doors began to close. "Mr. Gaines," she held his gaze through the narrowing gap. "Someone saw what you did tonight. Not just General Webb. Me. I always saw you." Earl looked at her. "I know you did, Miss Anand," he said quietly. "You always did." The door closed. The elevator took him down. And in the basement of Hargrove Regional, the building breathed around the shoring that held it steady, held up by the attention of a man who had spent 11 years listening, while everyone else looked straight through him. Outside, the January sun came up. If Earl's story of hidden strength and quiet, unstoppable service moved you, hit that like button now. The most powerful heroes are the ones you walk past every day without seeing. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to look closer. Subscribe for more stories of the silent ones who hold the world together. Drop a comment below. Have you ever met someone like Earl?